On today's show, Laura Heywood interviews
from NBC's The Voice, from Broadway's Rocktopia, American Idiot, Jesus Christ Superstar, and Rent, and now of PCG Theatrical, Tony Vincent. Welcome to Laura Heywood Interviews. I'm Laura Heywood. Some people make rock music. Some people do musicals. Some people star in rock musicals. And occasionally, rarely, we come across someone who does and has helped to reinvent all three. My guest today first charted a rock single when he was a college student before signing to a record label. Within a few years, he had 6 songs on the Billboard charts and was poised to continue his rise towards superstardom as a rock god. Fate had another kind of superstar identity in mind for him in the late 1990s, though, and that was in musical theater. And yes, I'm using the word superstar very intentionally. As Broadway swung toward a contemporary rock sound with Rent, Tony found himself first on tour and then starring on Broadway with Rent. He's one of a few actors to have played both Roger and Mark. And then he spent over a year with Jesus Christ Superstar. See what I did there? Superstar. Both in the 2000 film and in the Broadway revival. Dominating the rock musical genre, Tony also starred in We Will Rock You in London's West End, American Idiot on Broadway, and most recently was seen in Rocktopia. In 2012, he was a favorite on NBC's The Voice, competing on Team CeeLo and becoming a household name. And all the while, he's continued to make music of his own. He travels the world, and he's now a dad. In between gigs as the frontman for the Music of David Bowie International Symphony Tour, he's based back in Nashville, the city where Tony recorded that first single as a college student. And he is now bringing all of his life and work experience together in the Ultimate Performers Coaching Program, PCG Theatrical. PCG is a customized full-service artist development program specifically designed for aspiring and working musical theater performers, featuring personalized curricula, not a one-size-fits-all program. I first met Tony during American Idiot and have followed his soaring career ever since. It's an honor to have you here in studio. Tony Vincent, welcome to Laura Heywood Interviews.
Hey, it's a joy to be here. Thank you.
I'm so thrilled you're here, and let's start with PCG. The website is pcguniversal.com. PCG Theatrical is your new program.
Right.
What's PCG Universal first?
So I met a gentleman who runs this company called PCG Universal last year, almost to the week. And it's an artist development company that essentially deals with commercial music. So if you're a parent who has a young, really talented individual that wants to make rock and roll or pop music sort of their trajectory in life, this is a kind of a one-stop shop to do that. And when I met with Bernard Porter 12 months ago, I said, I'd like to be a provider because I'm also a performance coach. I said, but, something over the last 20 years has happened on Broadway. And when, I do believe that Rent tipped that domino.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe that there would be a Hamilton without Rent in a lot of ways.
Oh, well, there wouldn't be, because Rent is what made Lin-Manuel Miranda fall in love with theater.
Well, there you go.
I mean, there were LPs before that, but
Sure.
He was a Rent head in a major way.
Yeah, and I think that, when you can command $2,000 a ticket, celebrities want to be on Broadway stages, something has happened. Finally, Broadway is no longer uncool.
Mm-hmm.
And young people in middle school or high school classes are finding that this is something that it's nothing to be ashamed about anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And we're breathing new life into young people and experiencing musical theater in a really, really inventive way, especially when you start combining it with pop and rock sensibilities of songs.
So PCG existed for rock musicians, and you were like, we need to find a way to encourage theater kids who are also rock musicians and develop their careers.
It's not even just about rock musicians. It's about anybody who wants to make musical theater their trajectory in life. And I'm talking from middle school and young high school students, people who are getting ready for college, prep exams,
mm-hmm.
and all of that sort of thing. So it really is the only, I'll say, handcrafted one-on-one curriculum that is based around the individual. Because even if you go to a conservatory or you go to a bunch of, acting schools here in New York, you're still dealing with a group curriculum. Mm-hmm. You're dealing with, you have to fit into a mold that's already there, where, I have a great group of providers around me. I'm also an instructor, and we take that young person and create basically a 6-12 month program for them to follow pretty succinctly. And they come into Nashville for about 2 to 3 days, and we sort of do this really influx of hardcore education, and then they go back home and, do their school life and that sort of thing, and then they come back, another 4 or 5 weeks later.
Yeah, that's so incredible. I mean, I think that there is nothing better than a one-on-one or very, very small group instruction, no matter what you're doing.
Absolutely.
Because,
Absolutely.
if you have 5 kids and one of them's an incredible dancer and one of them's an incredible singer and one of them can rap like nobody's business and the other one, can belt, but somebody else is a legit soprano,
Yeah.
they are all going to need different skill sets, practice.
Absolutely.
And that means that each one of them is only going to get 20% of the time to work on their area of need.
That's true.
Whereas when you're one-on-one, you get, very, very refined techniques from the best in the business.
Yeah, and if you do have questions about this, the site actually is PCGtheatrical.com, even though it sort of kind of skews through the PCG Universal site. You can get there from PCGtheatrical.com, and it'll give you a ton of info and an email address. You can contact us and find out a little bit more.
Got it. That's good to know, because it did take me directly to PCG.
Exactly. Yeah.
Universal.com/theater. So there are a lot of ways to get there.
Yeah. The Universal thing takes care of the commercial music, and I am the president of the theater arm.
Wow. President Vincent.
I know. Isn't that wild?
I love it. I love it. Okay. When I heard that you were based in Nashville, I was like, that's an interesting choice for this rock and roller who I've seen as, literal demons on stage, whether it's the dark demonic alter ego of, the lead of American Idiot, or whether it's actually Judas, who's like a very famous historical bad guy.
Odd how comfortable those roles feel to me.
I know. Well, and also you have a look that's like right now you're all in black. You've got a little eyeliner on, you don't strike me as like a country and western kind of guy, which is what I think of Nashville as being about.
Yeah.
But then in researching your life for this interview, I found out you went to college there, and that's where your music career launched.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone has stuff for which they're misunderstood.
Sure.
But that was one I didn't see coming.
Well, I'll tell you, the only reason that I entertained the idea of going to Nashville for education in college was because they had a music business program at this university there. And at this point, this is back in 1991, there was no school in America that had this, where you could go get a business degree and study copyright law and music publishing and finance and accounting and management and still have access to a recording studio. I mean, there's tons of schools now that have it. Berkeley has it. It's not unusual now to find, but then it was incredibly cutting edge. And so a lot of my professors were people that were actually hands-on in the music industry, head publishing of Sony Tree and Warner Chappell. I mean, it was really amazing. And because I knew, although I wanted to be the recording artist, I knew I wanted to have as much education behind me as I possibly could.
So smart.
So, and that's how I essentially, long story short, got my first record deal with EMI.
Because you were able to negotiate it yourself because you had that training?
Well, I knew how to read a contract.
Right.
And I, of course, had to have a really great attorney because
of course.
I don't do my own contracts. But
yeah. you weren't going to fall for somebody coming along being like, "Hey, kid, sign on the dotted line." Like, you at least knew to get an attorney.
Yes, I did. A very expensive attorney.
Well,
but yeah,
I'm guessing that it was worth it.
It
whatever
was worth
that
it.
expense
Absolutely.
was.
Yeah.
The other thing that shocked me was that those charting singles that you had were on the Contemporary Christian chart.
Yeah, they were.
So were you actively a Christian recording artist, or did you just write songs about love and the world that could be heard
I'll be really
Christian?
honest with you. No, I became a Christian late in my high school years.
Okay.
But
born again?
Like born again Christian. Yeah. But all of my influences were from the Beatles to Depeche Mode to The Cure to Duran Duran to, it was a very English vibe that I was influenced and still am very influenced by musically. And so when I went to college in Nashville not only is, pretty high profile with country music, but at that time was very big in Christian music. Mm-hmm. And so I would go to this university and I hear these songs on, Christian radio, and I'm like, wow, this is so bad. This is so bad. I am going to make a record that's really dark for Christian music.
Which is something that I think there's a lot of out there now.
Yeah, probably.
Every once in a while, especially when I lived in a state where I had a car.
Yeah.
New York City isn't famous for
No.
for its driving, but when I lived in California and I was when in my early days of radio, I was commuting to various markets to do shows and stuff, and I would just flip around the dial, and sometimes I'd come across something that was like super rockin', and I'd be like, what is this? This is good.
Yeah.
And I would think it was going to be, like a Rage Against the Machine,
Sure.
kind of Nine Inch Nails-y.
Yeah.
And then I'd start hearing the lyrics and I'd be like, oh no,
wow.
oh no.
I got to switch this.
Yeah. But I mean, I'm a little more accepting of sort of like, look, you do you, if you're going to use your religion to try to tell me how to live my life, like that's not cool.
Let me tell you this. That's also probably what ended my career in Christian music because I wasn't that.
Yeah.
And I was talking about real life struggles. And I don't know if that's changed because I've distanced myself so much from that industry now. But the audience didn't want to be challenged. They didn't want to deal with struggle in a very honest way. And so I was like, you know what? I thought I could move this machine in a much more progressive way. It's not going to happen, so it's time for me to leave.
Yeah. Wow. So at what point did that happen? Is that when you found Rent? Is that theater? Like how it looks from, your Wikipedia page, which I always take with a grain of salt, but it looks like the timing of your launch into the musical theater world happened around the same time that you stopped releasing Christian music.
It did. I never admit this, at least I didn't used to when I was younger, because although I grew up doing musical theater, I never told anybody that I did, because if you're a musician and a songwriter and an artist, for some reason back then you lose artistic credibility. You're not a rock guy, you can't be. But what I did was I tried to use as many opportunities to perform live as I possibly could. So it didn't matter to me if it was children's choir or a musical or a battle of the bands or a rock show. It didn't matter. I wanted to be the best possible communicator I could be on stage. And so the venue and what that looked like was secondary to the opportunity.
What's the first musical you were ever in?
I was 9 years old, and it was a miming musical called Stop the World, I Want to Get Off. And I didn't even have a speaking part. It was
miming musical.
Yeah, well, the musical itself was, but it was about clowns, kind of. But I was this young boy, the young figure of the central male character, and there was this little moment where I did this little mime thing, and it was,
I could see that, actually.
Civic Light Opera. It wasn't dark enough for me, but that's all right.
Well, wait, so that was as a professional?
Yeah, well,
that was a professional theater. That wasn't like the school play where you...
No, this was Civic Light Opera in Albuquerque, New Mexico, where I was from.
How did it find you, or you find it? Were your parents like, hey, we read about this audition, do you want to go check it out? Were you pushing to be a performer?
I just tried to push any outlet that I could. And because I was drawn to music, I was 4 years old and I heard a Beatles record, and it literally, that's the trajectory.
Do you know which one it was?
Yeah, it was Hard Day's Night. Yeah.
It's a great album.
It's rock and roll, man. It still is. It sounds freaking dope still. And so, yeah, I don't know who found the opportunity to do that audition. I don't remember.
Wow,
I just knew.
That's so interesting, because I feel like usually actors who had this moment as a child where they like suddenly were thrown into the grown-up world of professional theater, the story of how they got there has been told so many times that it's like become like a myth. It's become mythologized. And, it's like, Leah Michele, her next door neighbor was going to audition for Les Mis and said, why don't you come? And then she got the part, and now she's a major star, and it's like, I have no reason to believe that story isn't true, but it also is like such a fairy tale kind of story that has been told a million times but the fact that you have no recollection of how you ended up, do you remember auditioning?
Yeah, I do remember auditioning. And I didn't even know what I was auditioning for. I mean, I knew that I was going in and I had a song, and I don't even remember what it was at that time. But, I wanted a 9-year-old boy and a cast of adults.
Yeah,
It
that's
was-
incredible.
Yeah,
And and it's set the stage
It did.
literally
Yeah.
for the rest of your life. Did you ever do like old-fashioned musicals? Were you ever in like Annie Get Your Gun?
no,
or-
I did. I know that I auditioned for The Sound of Music at some point.
I'm just picturing you as like the one Von Trapp kid.
Exactly,
who
with
comes-
eyeliner, right? Like, who is this son of yours?
Like
I
the
don't.
demonic
Yeah, exactly.
Von Trapp kid.
Yeah, old Father Von Trapp. I don't think this is your child.
I am 16 going on 17. Like,
So
to do it
yeah,
as a
needless to
death
say,
metal song.
I did not get cast in that show. I think that was once the only opportunity where I kind of entertained the idea of doing a little bit something more straight ahead.
Yeah,
I've always been attracted to stuff that's left of center. Always, musically, theatrically, it's the stuff that moves me
Right.
because usually those things move culture. Those things challenge the thought, and that's really what fuels me artistically.
Yeah, I agree. Sometimes people talk about being on the right side of history, and I'm always like, I want to be on the left side
Yeah,
of history.
right. Not wrong. The left side.
the correct side of
Yeah,
history.
right.
But I call that the left side.
Yeah, totally.
When Rent came along, a lot of people, including like Tony winners like Leslie Odom Jr., stood in long lines
Mm.
to have open call auditions. Is
Yeah.
that how you found it?
I'll be honest with you.
I hope so.
I will. I'll always be honest. I have nothing to lose anymore. I'm very proud and honored to still be doing this after many, many years. And so I'll try to be as,
Tell the truth.
When I decided to move to New York, which was right after my deal with EMI, it was to find another rock deal. And so I moved to the city and wound up. There were 3 things that I wanted to do before I actually pulled the trigger here. I wanted to find a place to live. I wanted to find a community in the city that I felt comfortable with, location-wise. And I wanted to find a really killer entertainment attorney. So I had a couple of appointments with attorneys because of who I had known from the industry in the past.
And how important you knew it was to have that attorney.
And so I met a gentleman who, funny enough, now, by the way, during my record deal, while I was on tour with that last CCM record, I did come to New York to see Rent.
Okay.
And I was like, I don't know
Original cast?
Original cast. And I don't know what I saw. I mean, of course I knew what I saw, and my folks simultaneously met me here, but the show was so hot, we couldn't get 3 tickets at the same time. So I went the first night, and actually Barry Manilow was in my row and didn't show up for Act 2.
Shut up.
Seriously.
I'm calling page 6. I feel
Yeah.
like this is still news.
Right? It is still news. And I'm kind of a closet Barry Manilow fan, so I was a little offended. Anyway, so I go back to where my parents are staying at a hotel, and I'm like, you will not believe what you're seeing. And by the way, I don't know how it's going to happen, but I've got to be in this show at some point. Because I was like, Roger Davis is speaking to me right now. I'm
Yeah.
like, that's kind of that's the glorified struggle of a songwriter,
I'm writing one
Yeah.
song.
And so when I walk into this attorney's office, he thinks actually he's meeting a different artist, and I think I'm meeting a different attorney. Don't ask how it happened, because it was a law firm, so there was multiple entertainment attorneys. He thought, hey, he had an appointment with somebody else, another male actor or artist, and I thought I was meeting another person. And we got to talking, and we realized that we're meeting the wrong individual.
It's like a romance movie for the
well,
music industry.
this is the one sort of serendipitous thing, because he negotiated 3 of the lead actor contracts with the company of Rent.
Oh my god.
And I'm like, really? Anyway,
I just walked into the wrong room.
exactly. And I'll tell you something. I did not have to wait in the line, but I still had to audition just like everybody else.
Oh sure. Well, and there's nothing wrong with getting an audition through
Frankly,
traditional means.
I don't want to wait outside in 30-degree weather. I'm like, am I going to be able to sing really well coming in from that kind of atmosphere? Doubtful that anybody could, frankly.
I don't think that you need to, have any kind of, not that you were expressing shame, but like there's nothing cooler about the open call process.
Yeah,
than
sure. Like I stood in
traditional
the
process.
line for 4 hours. Well, I didn't.
Yeah.
I had an appointment, but I still had to, be in front of Bernie Telsey just like everybody else.
Of course. And then was it Do you remember what your audition song for that was? Because I know they were like, don't sing musical theater songs.
Yeah. It might have even been a Tears for Fears song. Maybe. It had to have been an English band. It just did. That's what I do.
And then
It might have been a David Bowie track. I don't know.
well, I know Bowie is very,
Very
close
dear to me.
your heart.
Yeah.
And so you went through a callbacks series?
I think I had 3, if not 4 callbacks.
And did they know? Did they know you were going to be both a Mark and a Roger?
No, that happened in the run. That was kind of an accident because I started on the first national tour as a swing, so I covered 7 people,
and were those
including
two?
both Mark
Okay,
and Roger.
so they did know that you had both in you from the beginning.
You know what was so interesting about that experience is that as much as sort of the Roger character is the one that was like the tipping point, that's the intriguing thing, I felt much more at home playing Mark.
Do you think that's? I was about to say, do you think that's because, and then insert my own idea, but I'd rather say, why do you think that is?
I will tell you exactly why that is. Because all my life, I have been the guy who wasn't cool enough to be in the group.
Really? You seem like sort of the epitome of cool to me.
I was always the outsider. It's probably also why I never had a band. I was always a solo artist. I couldn't also deal with a bunch of flaky musicians who never showed up to rehearsal. And I was always a witnesser. I was like acquaintance of many, friend of almost no one.
Me too.
Frankly.
That's such a I love that description of Mark. I mean, he is the witnesser. He's the one who stands back and watches it all and records it.
It was hard to do. It was so close to home. It was really difficult.
That's interesting because when I was going to say, do you think that's because it was more like an acting job and less like playing yourself? But it sounds like I actually had it completely turned on its head because I see the guy who writes songs, who wears black nail polish. And I'm like, well, that's obviously a Roger. And maybe it feels good to get on stage and play like the dorky camera guy, but it sounds like maybe you were the dorky camera guy. I was the dorky
camera guy from the beginning.
Except your camera was a guitar.
Except my camera was a guitar.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
So Rent leads to what comes next?
Superstar,
which is first a movie.
Yeah, so I auditioned to be in this film. They shot it over in London. I was only one of 2 Americans. And we were the only non-English actors there. So I went in and I played the role of Simon Zealots. And
I watched your performance, your Simon performance on YouTube. And it's like, man, you haven't aged a day. Your hair's changed.
I go in phases. It's so funny. When it gets cold outside, for some reason, I decide to shave my head.
Interesting.
It's the most wrong, silly, nonsensical thing to do.
I feel like every performance, every production you've done, I
have
can
a different
identify.
hairstyle.
Yeah. It's like, well, there's the one where he had a bald head.
Yep.
There's the one where he had
half a head of hair.
There's the one where he had spiky dyed blonde hair. And right now you got a little fuzz.
A little.
It's not bicked, but it's
close.
Pretty shaved.
It's close.
Yeah, whereas on The Voice you were like bicked.
Yeah,
you were
I
polished.
was.
I could see my reflection in that noggin.
I was indeed. Listen, it cuts about 20, 25 minutes off my morning. It is glorious.
When you're bald?
Yeah.
I bet when it's like this now where you don't even have to
I
be
shave
that
it maybe
careful.
like once a week.
And you just put it on a 1 and you're like,
here we go. Yeah. But in regards to that Superstar experience, because the company knew they were going to bring Superstar to Broadway because that was Weber's first Broadway show. He was bringing his whole entire company of Really Useful Group over to see it. And in the process of that show, and I was still Simon Zealots when we started rehearsal. When we started previews for that show, there was a gentleman who played Judas, a rock singer out of Los Angeles, who made it through a preview. And then the understudy of Judas went on for a couple of days.
Was this because of vocal problems?
Yeah,
Or
yeah.
is that just the company line?
No, he couldn't sing. He didn't know what an 8-show week was like.
Oh,
He had
God.
he had no theater experience.
So this wasn't about polyps or
no, it's like you
an
oversang.
injury. He just didn't know how. He didn't have the stamina.
Didn't even have the knowledge of how do I sound aggressive without actually hurting myself.
Oh, mm-hmm.
And so Weber came actually personally in, saw him perform, I think the 4th preview. He said, fire him, hire the blonde guy, deal with the fallout. I'm out of here.
And did he know you as like the guy from the movie?
Yeah.
Or it was more than just. It was,
But
you know
I
what
had-
it reminds me of? It's like Christine Dyack can sing it, sir.
It was that.
Yeah.
It really was. But that being said, I still really had no personal relationship at that point with Andrew.
Even after having been in the movie.
No, because he wasn't there every day.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense.
You know, he didn't direct the show. It was his music, and he let his creative team of Really Useful Group dictate how the movie was done, you know?
As I expect will be doing with Cats.
I presume so. Yeah.
I love that, Andrew Lloyd Webber, you've listed off all of these British rock gods
Yeah.
who are your idols, and then there he is, and he sort of is one too.
You look back at his, I'm sorry, I don't care who you are. You look back and ridiculous songwriter.
I know.
Yeah.
And it's funny because some of his music, I think of like you said, like Rent was the tipping point for rock on Broadway.
Right.
And then, I think about Jesus Christ Superstar, which
Sure.
is also a rock opera in its
every
own way.
Yeah.
But it sounds, because of the era in which I grew up, which was very much the Andrew Lloyd Webber era.
Yes.
And like, plus Miss Saigon and Les Mis. But other than that, it was like this sort of epic, soaring,
Absolutely, sure.
symphonic rock opera that it doesn't sound like rock to me anymore. It
I get
sounds
it.
like musical theater.
Yeah, totally.
But it doesn't surprise me that that's the musical theater composer that you are maybe most closely associated with.
Well, definitely in that period, and what's, ironic about that, that started off as a rock record. It was never intended on being a staged performance. It was a concept album.
Right.
You
And then the
know?
album was so popular that it became a stage show retroactively.
That's right. That's right.
Were you aware of that when that album was
No.
first
No,
around?
not at all.
Not until.
Uh-uh.
Did you know it before you were cast in or before you were auditioning for it?
Yeah, but very little. I wasn't, I didn't listen to musical theater records.
Even though you loved performing in shows.
It was rock and roll to me.
Yeah.
It was, it started probably with like Van Halen and some, hard rock. I put hard rock. It's not hard rock. It's pop music with heavy guitars, and then I sort of just got really immersed in British rock and roll and pop because a friend brought a synthesizer over. I started as a drummer when I was 7 years old. And
Of course.
as you do, right? And
Man, that is a glutton for punishment for
parents?
any parents. I hope you had a soundproof
no,
attic
I
or
just had very
something.
forgiving parents. Actually,
Wow.
I've had really great support from my folks. It was, I don't know if I'd be here without that. I really don't. I think my tenacity would have gotten me close. But a friend of mine in school brought this vintage it's vintage now, but it was a current day synthesizer over, and I was just enamored at what this thing sounded like, and the knobs and the tangible feel of having control over manipulating sound. It was fascinating to me, and so I became a programmer because of that.
So you were a business programmer, musician, actor.
Then guitar player on my second record. And,
wow. I know that they're not British, but were you a Talking Heads fan?
You know what? It's so funny. No, but you can sense there's English-esque vibe there.
I literally just had to look up whether they were British or American.
Yeah, no.
Because I hear David Byrne talk and I can't really tell.
I know.
Because he has this affectation.
Yes, exactly.
And
he
I
does.
feel like he has a lot of the same kind of open, proud weirdness.
Yes,
that,
totally.
That some of those British artists have.
Yeah, I'm a fan.
Have you seen American Utopia yet?
No.
You gotta see it.
I know. I've heard it's nothing
Are you in
but
town for a
spectacular.
while?
Only till Friday morning.
Oh no.
I
well,
know.
that gives you 2 nights
I
to
know.
try to squeeze it
I
in.
know. I know. I've heard it's breathtakingly cool.
Well, if you're coming back, I don't know how long it's running, but like, just figure out a way. I used to be a real rock and roll, and again, like, I don't know that I'm using the right term. It was like a lot of pop music that
Yeah.
pop/rock.
Sure.
Adult contemporary, perhaps. But when I was in high school and college, I was going to like 3 or 4 concerts a week. Now I go to 5 or 6 Broadway shows a week. But I got real burnt out on mosh pits and standing room only and lining up early so you could get a good spot.
And then beers spilled all over you.
And I just, and like my eardrums would start to hurt, and I didn't want to wear earplugs, but I couldn't not wear them. And I just was like, I'd rather stay home and listen to the album.
Yeah.
But I saw American Utopia, and I was like, if this is what rock concerts were like, I would still go to rock concerts.
Absolutely.
It's really phenomenal. I just feel like you'd be into it.
I'm sure I would be.
All right, so we don't have to make this a chronology of your theatrical life, but I do want to talk about American Idiot, which was, I think, your next Broadway show after.
It was the next Broadway show.
Yeah.
That's correct.
So in the meantime, you went to the West End and you starred in We Will Rock You.
Right.
Which you were playing the like Freddie Mercury character, right?
Well, the initial idea, that show was in development for like 7 to 9 years. And they started out with like, let's make this about Queen. And I know that Wilson Heredia was in a version of it, and
also of Rent.
Like, you know, we're
if you can
a
sing
chosen
rock
few.
and you like theater.
That's right. But they decided to make it this sort of futuristic love story between these 2 outcast kids who.
It sounds like Bat Out of Hell.
I have my own Meatloaf stories that I won't. My wife used to sing backup for him.
Really?
Yeah.
Have you seen Bat Out of Hell?
The stage show? Won't do it.
Got it.
Nope, won't do it.
Okay.
Can't support the machine.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about We Will Rock You.
Let's
a little
do
bit
that.
More then. Your wife was in that too, wasn't she?
She was in the Vegas version of it. That's right. So after I did the first year and a half of it on the West End, I took a year off, did a record back in New York, came home. I missed the city too much. I missed doing my own music.
So by then, New York was home.
Yeah.
As opposed to Nashville or New Mexico.
Yeah, I came to live full-time in New York in 97.
Okay.
And this was now 2003, I think, when I was
They say you don't really become a New Yorker until you hit the 10-year mark.
So I hit the 21-year mark when I left and went back home. I can't even believe I said that. Went back to Nashville in February. So I feel that I've done my time.
Oh, you certainly have.
21
You
years
certainly
is a
have
long time.
now. I'm not sure that after 6 years you were
No,
you were coming home.
Plus, I was living in London half of that time.
These are all technicalities and semantics, and you can identify however you want to identify, and I will respect.
No, I'm a New Yorker for sure.
Okay, so by the way, like we Will Rock You never came to Broadway.
No, they chose not to. I think they did it. I think they were smart in that. I think, unfortunately, they were not so smart about taking it to Vegas because, although it has some of the best pop and rock written songs, there was kind of a serious, cheeky love story. And when you go to Vegas, you don't want to have to think at all. That's the last thing you want to do. I mean, Mamma Mia has had some success there because it's a party, essentially, on stage, right? And that's not what we were. I mean, we were pretty authentically heavy-hitting Queen material, but we were still trying to present an honest story.
Like a narrative.
Yeah. And that just was not happening with.
I saw the 90-minute Phantom in Vegas.
Well, then there's that. We started with the 2-hour show, and they made us cut it down, yeah.
Yeah, that's so funny about Vegas. I think there's a short Lion King there, too.
Every show now, from what I understand, has to be 90 because from what I understand, you don't want people sitting outside of those casinos for very long. Give them entertainment and get them back spending money.
Yeah.
So I get it.
Sense.
I get it. But yeah, you miss a lot of the real gems and shows when they're so, edited in that fashion.
Well, speaking of gems, American Idiot is one of my all-time favorite shows on Broadway. I was very skeptical when I heard that it was going to become a musical because I grew up in the Oakland Hills where the guys from Green Day are from.
Yeah.
They were a local band when I was around, one of the greatest regrets of my life. And I don't really even believe in regret, but I had the opportunity to see Green Day perform at a club in Berkeley called the Gilman when I was which is their home club when I was in high school, and I didn't go. I don't think it's because I wasn't like allowed out that night. I think I was just like, I'm not down to like get pushed around in a mosh pit. And it was a tiny place. It was a legendary Berkeley punk rock spot.
Cool.
And while I have always, like you described yourself, been an outsider and a weirdo, and I always kind of looked like a cheerleader more than a goth, even though I knew and felt on the inside that I was a goth.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'd show up at punk rock type stuff and feel even more of an outsider because I looked too much like the cute little girl next door instead, because, like I didn't have any piercings or, like tattoos and I've like got this sunshiny smile, it's like, oh, we go to these places to get away from her. Anyway, when I heard that, I loved Broadway. I was very entrenched in Broadway with my anonymous Broadway girl character by the time American Idiot was announced. But here were two things I loved that I didn't know if there was a Venn diagram where they both crossed over.
Absolutely. Sure.
Having Michael Mayer attached definitely gave me some hope because I was familiar with his work.
Sure.
But I just didn't know. And then the more I heard about it, the more I began to give it a chance.
Yeah.
You, of course, played St. Jimmy.
Yeah.
Who was, we weren't sure at the beginning of the show who he was.
Yeah.
He was a dark influence on our main character. And the flip side of the coin of not having seen Green Day play the Gilman was that I did get to see American Idiot at Berkeley Rep in its pre-Broadway run. Berkeley Rep has like 500 seats? It's a small...
It's really intimate.
It's a small house. It may even be smaller than that. This is the theater I grew up going to. And
but it has cutting-edge technology.
Does it ever?
So, I mean, it is a riveting theater.
It's the best of both worlds.
Yeah.
You get the intimacy of... a very small space, but you get the technology and not just cutting edge technology, but cutting edge artistry.
Absolutely.
Cutting
groundbreaking plays.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's really an amazing place to do a show.
If I could have a subscription to any regional theater in the world, I think I would choose Berkeley Rep.
Absolutely.
And of course,
I'm right there with you.
I could have a subscription. I just don't know that I could afford the plane tickets in addition to the subscription.
Yeah.
But I do try to go see a show there whenever I'm back visiting my family. So I missed the tickets. They sold out, and I was heartbroken, but then the show extended. I bought tickets without having a trip back to California planned, and then called my parents and said, we're going to need to plan a trip home for me because I have tickets to a show in Berkeley. And luckily, when I called them immediately after I made my purchase, we were able to purchase tickets for the whole family.
Oh, that's great.
And we still talk about it.
It was the most satisfying pieces of theater I've ever been a part of. It was unconventional in so many ways.
Yeah.
From a 90-minute from start to finish, one act musical that was an onslaught of from just an emotional ride of very touching moments to very aggressive moments to heartbreak, to some of also the most visceral physical energy on stage. Stephen Hoggett, our choreographer, did something that I have never seen done before. It was brutal. It was brutal on the actors. I can say that it didn't include me. I was the only sort of character that I didn't have to throw my body all over that stage for 90 minutes straight. But it was an onslaught of so many different variables that you couldn't not pay attention.
Well, and that was sort of part of it. Was it's interesting, even in the cultural shift that we've had since 2010, is that, you know, there was a lot. It was one of the first pieces of art that I saw that really challenged America on how much time we were spending in front of screens. And I don't know that the iPhone, I don't remember what year the iPhone was introduced, but like the set was made of American Idiot was made up of television screens.
That's right, yeah.
And the backdrop was like newspaper and, you know, sort of flyerish propaganda.
Yep.
And it was all about the onslaught of information that we are, you know, that are catapulted toward us at any given moment in our lives, and the sort of dumbing down of America as the result of what we're being fed through the media.
Yeah.
And that feels, now if something came out that was like made that case, it wouldn't feel so groundbreaking.
Absolutely
But
not.
American Idiot as an album, even before the show, was challenging us in that way. And I remember visceral is the right word. Like I felt this musical in my soul.
Soul, absolutely. And as an actor,
And they didn't ruin my favorite album either, you know.
And I'll tell you,
it enhanced it.
It also, as a guy who has made records for 25 years, that has to be also one of the most gratifying experiences that I had as a recording artist, because Green Day was our band, and we spent a lot of time, and Green Day spent a lot of time on that record. You know,
You mean on the
cast album?
show,
Sorry, yeah. Whereas most Broadway shows, they get like 48 hours to do a cast album.
And isn't that union dictated?
No,
It isn't?
not really. It's how much is a company and their producers going to actually put towards this record. And Green Day said, we're going to make this a legitimate rock record. And that's what they did. And so they're like, I don't care if it takes us 6 or 8 weeks. We're going to make this thing absolutely sonically beautiful. And it is. I believe it's whether I had something to do with it, you know, or my involvement or not, it is the best sounding Broadway cast record ever.
It's something I still listen to all the time.
I'm just
And
so
when
proud.
I think about that cast too, and all the people who were in it, was like, oh yeah, Alicia Umphris was in it, and Josh Henry was in it, and Stark Sands was in it, and John Gallagher Jr. was in it, and you were in it,
And Rebecca
Naomi Jones was in it,
Yeah.
and Christina Seju was in it, and
That's
like,
right.
I mean, I can still.
It was a all-star company that is
sure was.
just so satisfying on so many levels.
I actually will never forget seeing Alicia perform at Berkeley Rep because she just didn't look like any Broadway actress I'd ever seen,
Right.
And I was like, it was one of the first times it occurred to me that that talent didn't have a body type, and that was a huge inspiration to me. And
Sure.
she and I have since become friends, and she's still fighting stigma for,
Of course.
you know, for the way she looks, and she is just one of the most talented performers that I've ever seen.
Insanely
The fact
talented.
that she's now playing leading roles. I mean, I remember seeing her, and I don't know if you've stayed in touch at all, but you know, when she was in On the Town,
Right.
I was certain she was going to win the Tony, and when
Yeah.
she wasn't nominated, I was like
I know.
ready to have a fit about it. But everything about that show, I don't know. I don't know what a revival would look like.
Yeah.
But I wish I could go back in time and watch the original production. And
Yeah,
I was
know.
I was lucky enough to see it like.
And then
I
how
don't
do
know,
you
at least
how do you
8 times.
articulate what you saw to someone who hadn't seen it? It is very, very difficult.
You know what's funny is that I actually went to see it. Like I said, I think I saw it 8 times on Broadway, and one of those times I was the +1 of someone who was reviewing it for a major publication, and he compared his experience in the review he wrote as somebody who had never heard the album to the way I responded to it as somebody who loved the album, and how we both took different things from it, but both came around to, or like we started at separate ends, but we both ended up with this mutual understanding of something we'd shared. And I mean, I could spend hours just talking about how much that musical, it was another step into how to combine rock and theater in a way that doesn't do a disservice to either, but emphasizes
Absolutely.
the value of both.
Yeah. No, I couldn't articulate it really any better.
So I think the obvious question is, are you ever going to write for the theater? Have you? Are you? why haven't you, if you haven't?
That's a great question. I haven't. And I also know at this point in my life to never say never. I think also, just to sort of piggyback on what made American Idiot special, is that so many of us were musicians as well as actors. And I'm such a believer that when you play an instrument, you understand music at a different level. And I don't mean that you have to be some big virtuoso or that you have to be a ridiculous guitar player or drummer or sax player, but you can get into music in a different way, deeper. And so I think that's what made that original cast so special, is because many of us were musicians way before we were actors, so music lived in us, in a different way, in a much more complex way. Just to come back to your question.
Yes, I was definitely going to call you out on evading it, so I'm glad you came back around to it.
I'm not. I am not opposed to it. I find writing musicals very difficult.
So you've tried.
Well, I've put myself in the headspace of how do you do this because this is a big struggle that I have. There's been very few shows that I've ever seen where there's 2 or 3 songs in the second act that you just wished were cut because they put you to sleep.
They can't all be 11 o'clock numbers.
No, they can't. There's, and then it's intense because there's a number out there where it takes it's between 7 and 11 years for a show to ever hit a Broadway stage, if it ever goes there. It's a lot of time. I think that there might be a time where that makes sense to me.
Okay.
But literally, I mean, that being said, that's why I'm so compelled to invest in young people right now and what they're doing, because I come from a very different perspective, not from a standard musical theater perspective, but some guy who's a musician who then wound up, being on Broadway with originating roles. And if I can impact young people, and I'm talking from middle school to high school, young college kids, in a really, really honest way. I mean, this PCG theatrical program that I've started it's inspiring to me, because when you see that penny drop in a young person's performance in literally a matter of minutes sometimes, it is so incredibly gratifying. You're passing the baton to get someone to do it the best that they possibly can be in a different way, because the teaching is so different than what a structured sort of theatrical musical theater course would ever be, or whatever's out there,
So I've been teaching workshops at AMDA, the Academy of Music and Dramatic Art, on social media and the artists.
Oh, very cool.
And everyone comes in expecting me to give
Twitter notes.
Well, I mean, I don't even look at people. I gave a lecture last night to 150 people. I can't go in and say, here's what you are specifically doing right and you are specifically doing wrong. I have to talk in really general terms.
Absolutely.
I much prefer when people hire me to do one-on-one coaching.
Absolutely.
But I was going to say, first of all, if any of your students are curious or interested in boosting their social media, you have an expert at your disposal that you can call. I would definitely not mind being flown out to Nashville.
Brilliant.
But also, so they expect me to say, here are the analytics. Like, there's this term that infuriates me called growth hacking. That's about how to sort of artificially inflate your numbers of followers. And mine is more like a life coaching workshop. It's like, we need to figure out what you have that's unique, and make that as visible as possible, because someday there's going to be a role that comes along that you are the perfect person for, that you are the only person who can play that role. And if you haven't presented yourself on social media as your true, authentic, unique self, then you're going to get passed over. And if you're trying to make yourself, like, it's great if you love Sutton Foster and you think you want to be the quote unquote next Sutton Foster, find out who her dance teacher is and take classes from that person.
Yeah, right.
You know, if you have the same vocal range, sing some of her songs, but don't imitate her, and don't try to make yourself look like her on social media, because worst case scenario, you're going to end up being second rate Sutton Foster. And best case scenario, you're going to end up getting her cast-offs. But it sounds like the program you're working on, because you're working with people one-on-one, you really can focus on what they bring to the industry that absolutely nobody else does.
Absolutely.
And turn those things up to 11 or 20 or 150, so that when the time comes, when that role that they were born for, that they will be the best prepared for that moment.
Completely.
I also think what crossed through my mind when you were talking about not being sure whether writing for the theater is your thing, it brought me back to what you said about Mark and Roger, and how you're a Mark. That you are like maybe the occasional participant, but you're the observer.
Yeah.
Whereas Roger would write a musical,
yeah,
but Mark would just
probably wouldn't be very good. But
well, I mean, we know he has at least one great song in him, and you got to start somewhere, you know. I mean, and you know what? It can even sound like La Boheme. You know, isn't that one of the criticisms about his song, that it sounds like Musetta's Waltz?
Right.
But we know that musical theater based on La Boheme does okay.
Yeah. Totally.
But like I've gotten to know you much better over the course of the last 50 minutes, and I saw the Mark in you, whereas before I just saw the Roger in you. But when you talking about maybe you won't do that, I felt like there he is. There's Mark, or maybe there's Tony.
I think there's two. There's a freedom the older I get to say no, it's not my gig, because I used to when I was young. I could never say no. I couldn't. I felt the pressure of doing what other people would want, or making them happy, or whatever that meant, you know. And I finally feel secure in my own skin.
Well, I'm glad you're never saying never, because we, you know, like, you never know, might just pop out of you, or you might write an album like American Idiot that turns out to be
fair enough
a musical. We have about 4 minutes left in the show, and I always close out the show by talking about a cause that's important to my guest, because to me, there's no excuse for having a public platform if you're not using it to make the world a better place.
Yeah.
And also, there are so many organizations doing good in the world that we don't hear about often enough. And you've brought a really special one to us today.
Yeah. I'm a big supporter of St. Jude. I think that it probably it touches me because I'm a father of 2 kids, but to see a young child hurt is just, it seems so unfair. And if I can do anything, you know, to help families that are going through that, sign me up. I mean, it's why I support this organization so much. There's very, very little that is kept back to help the company run itself.
That's good to know.
And so what you're contributing really goes a very long way.
So St. Jude's Research Hospital, for those who don't know, has a mission of advancing cures and means of prevention for pediatric catastrophic diseases. They fund research and treatment. And I think that something that's really important, especially with a name like St. Jude, is to say that no child is denied treatment based on their religion or on their family's ability to pay, which is why it's so important that we contribute as much as we can to organizations like this, because especially with don't get me started on the state of healthcare in America right now. But, you know, I believe in socialized medicine. I think everybody should get the medical care they need, and that, you know, we'll find a way as a country to pay for it. But especially when it's children, and especially when it's catastrophic, we got to keep these kids alive.
I know.
And so I'm going to be making a donation to St. Jude in your honor today. And I'm going to encourage everybody listening to do the same. I'm a firm believer that even a little bit helps.
Absolutely.
And that with enough drops in the bucket, we can make a big splash.
Agree. Thank you.
So please go to www.stjude.org. That's STJUDE.org, and donate as much as you can. I have a dream that someday there will be something that people call the Laura Heywood effect, where an organization like St. Jude will get so many $5 donations on the same day that they'll go, "What happened?"
Yeah.
And they'll go, "Oh, well, Laura Heywood talked about it on her radio show
That would
today."
be incredibly special. For sure.
So I'm going to go ahead and make that donation, and I hope everyone will join me. Tony Vincent, you have such a storied career, and you remain the most grounded, approachable, easy to talk to guy I've ever met. That's pretty amazing, because especially after being on that big TV show, you could have really strutted in here like, kind of a dick, and you didn't at all. You're so nice.
I just feel, I'm 46 now, that I get to still sing for a living and impact young people. I just feel so blessed.
I wish that when I was really, really wanted to be an actor, I wish I'd had something like PCG to go to.
Me too. I would have given my right arm for that opportunity.
Then you couldn't have played guitar anymore.
Yeah, that would have been tough. That would have been tough.
Please don't let anyone give their right arm or their left or any other body parts.
No, it does not cost you your right arm to join PCG Theatrical.
But please check out PCGtheatrical.com. You can also visit TonyVincent.com for his music and much more. Follow Tony the Vincent on Twitter and the official Tony Vincent on Instagram. I'm Laura Heywood. This has been Laura Heywood Interviews and Tony Vincent. I hope we stay in touch and are friends forever.
We will be.